I hope Dr. Steve Turley is correct. I hope there is a massive populist uprising against the far left surging throughout the nation. I sure hope so.
With a published article that said that we needed to ban homeschooling once and for all because it encourages patriarchy and white supremacy. I know I'm not going to get into it nevertheless, but the article was written several months ago. Okay, she penned it several months ago, but ironically, it was finally published just this last February, March, right when the entire world was homeschooling. Kids across the entire world were literally homeschooling, going to school online because of the outbreak of the coronavirus. Only a left-wing nut could publish a piece that argued that we should ban a practice that the entire world was currently practicing. But that's left-wing liberalism. They are at war with reality, okay? That's why they require fake news. Fake news is simply an extension of the fact that leftist liberals are at war with reality. Hello, Jim Acosta. And nothing demonstrates this war more than the recent championing by our left-wing lunatics of the riots and the hysteria that swept our nation over the last few weeks. While at the very same time, by the way, impugning and denigrating the men and women of law enforcement who are simply trying to do their jobs. Now, keep in mind, I'm not just talking public opinion here. I'm not representing simply the popular opinion among liberal populations. I'm talking about liberal lawmakers themselves. Again, this war in reality could not be more explicit when you have lawmakers taking the side of law breakers over and against the very law enforcement they employ. When there's a total breakdown between lawmakers and law enforcement, you have an example of this dysfunctional perception of reality. And that dysfunction, that war with reality is now more and more catching up with the political left. There is right now in our midst, there is a massive populist uprising that's surging across the country, ready to push back the far left. Americans have had it. And they've had it absolutely with all this left-wing virtue signaling, all the left-wing double standards, the virus shaming, the mass shaming, all to be discarded the moment a bunch of left-wing rioters and looters start destroying our cities and our monuments, right? Americans have had it with this nonsense, and they're beginning to rebel. Let's start in Atlanta. As I'm sure many of you know, a white police officer by the name of Garrett Rolfe shot and killed a black man by the name of Rayshard Brooks. Now, you should know that many believe that the police officer shot Rayshard Brooks did indeed have reasonable justification for the shooting, unlike the case with the killing of George Floyd. But regardless, the officer has since been fired, and as of just the other day, he has been officially charged with murder by Atlanta prosecutors, which was rather stunning given the fact that this incident did involve a situation where the police officer legitimately believed his life, his welfare was at risk in the incident. And so, needless to say, Atlanta policemen are rebelling. The Atlanta Police Department is reporting that they are experiencing what they're calling a, quote, higher than usual, close quote, number of officers calling out of work. Coincidentally, these were officers working the night shift. Interesting. Police officers scheduled to patrol the streets at night have begun calling in sick and not showing up. Just a coincidence, of course, right? Or a coinkydink, as my daughter likes to call it. Nothing to see here, just a coincidence. Let's move on. And to make matters even worse for the citizens of Atlanta, again, thanks to leftist liberals in charge, Atlanta police officers have actually stopped responding to calls in 3 of the department's 6 zones. Now, if you don't know, Atlanta police patrol 6 zones covering some 500,000 residents, which means half of Atlanta's streets are basically going, at least to some extent, unpoliced. Now, of course, the immediate response to that is, what the heck do you expect? You can't throw law enforcement under the bus, turning them into bad guys and turning the bad guys into good guys without there being a massive backlash and blowback. And that's precisely what we're seeing in Atlanta and indeed around the nation. We talked about this just the other day, but it's all part of this pattern of a populist backlash against the liberal left. And again, we're calling it populist because these aren't Democrats per se. These aren't Republicans per se. These are non-registered voters, people who are otherwise completely apolitical, who are suddenly getting red-pilled and have had enough of these left-wing lunatic antics. And so they're pushing back. As we reported the other day, police are beginning to resign in mass all across the country. City police are telling their left-wing liberal city lawmakers to take their cultural Marxism and shove it. You don't have to defund us or disband us. We quit. We're out of here. Cities are beginning to lose their police, and all because of this disgusting rhetoric being spewed from their city councils and mayors, all left-wing, all of whom have had the goal of taking the side of those perpetrating all the lawlessness and violence. At least 7 Minneapolis police officers have resigned. More than half a dozen are in the process of leaving as their own form of protest against city officials that threw them under the bus. In Florida, an entire SWAT team resigned after the police chief knelt with the protesters. I mean, just think about that. The SWAT team's letter of resignation stated unequivocally that the risk of carrying out their duties was simply no longer acceptable to them and to their families if their leadership is more aligned with the perpetrators of lawlessness than those entrusted to enforce the law. Again, these are consequences that never seem to enter into the mind of the liberal leftist, and that's, of course, again, because they are at war with reality. They cannot see the consequences, the blowback to their actions. In Buffalo, all 57 members of a police tactical unit have resigned in protest over the suspension of 2 of their colleagues who were filmed shoving.
Okay, so we're getting this blowback, as he calls it, Dr. Steve Turley calls it, and these are in a lot of different cities, a lot of different ways, calling in sick, resigning, not going to work, letters of resignation. It's a serious problem. We've already had enough problems, but support the criminality that's going on here, politically and legally, it's too much.
An elderly protester to the ground. Now, this populist uprising, by the way, is not just police officers. We talked about this the other day. Take a look at this. 79% of truckers say that they refuse to deliver to cities that are in the process of defunding their police departments. So what do you know? As it turns out, truckers' lives matter too, don't they? At least they do to the truckers and to their families. So their livelihood and their response.
Well, this means that you're not going to get the items you want, and you're not going to get the services you want or the supplies you want. Think about that. These have long-term consequences.
Responsibilities to their families are simply not worth the risk of taking a job that has them entering into cities where left-wing chaos reigns. And so I wonder what store owners are going to do now with no longer any supplies coming to stock up their shelves. Do you think they're going to start maybe, I don't know, moving out of these left-wing sewers we call cities?
Yep. All right, so a lot of this is coming on full bore. Hold on. All right, so these have big consequences. We're going to see these fold out and unfold for the next several years. But we've got to get these liberal people out of office, those that are elected and those that are appointed. Our freedom of our nation, our food, our funding, transportation, our survival, financially, small business-wise, in these different areas where these liberal mayors and judges and people are, there's a lot of repercussion and blowback.
Oh, wait a minute. Never mind. What do you know? It's already happening. Business owners are telling these cultural Marxist leaders to shove it as well. They're leaving these cities in droves. Think about it. Think about why on earth would they stay in areas where public officials...
Walmart and other companies not to warned Walmart and other countries not to leave the city, and they're saying, well, screw you, we're not staying around. There you are.
Officials were arresting small business owners just a few weeks back for trying to put food on their tables, only then to turn around and celebrate rioters and looters destroying their small businesses. What the hell, man? And so business owners are leaving. They're going to the exurbs, as it were, the more rural areas, who, by the way, are rising up and protecting their communities from this left-wing decay. I don't know if you saw this. A bunch of Black Lives Matter protesters descended on a small Ohio town which has only 13 black residents And when they assembled, these 80 protesters, they were met with, get this, over 700 white counter-protesters armed with rifles, handguns, and baseball bats. Armed white men from motorcycle gangs, pro-police officer groups such as Back the Blue, they flocked the small town of Bethel, Ohio, and overwhelmed the small Black Lives Matter protesters with shouts of "All Lives Matter," "Blue Lives Matter," shouted them down. And speaking of bikers,
So this small town, they only had 13 black people, but they found out the Black Matters Live people were coming, and about 700 unheard of them showed up and said, "Not in our town. Get out of here."
we talked about this the other day. A group of self-proclaimed bikers for Trump. They're pledging to retake Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone on the 4th of July in honor of Independence Day. Thousands have already committed to going, and their plan is to show up in mass numbers and begin the process of removing the barriers that were set up by these Antifa-stan thugs. They're going to dismantle the barriers and return the occupied police station back over to the Seattle Police Department. And there's nothing these Antifa-stan thugs can do about it. There is a massive populist revolt surging throughout our nation. As discouraging as these riots have been and the left-wing woke insanity that's accompanied them, we can all take heart that when you're at war with reality, eventually reality always comes back to win.
All right, we're going to end it here. Good report by Steve, and I think he is accurate in what he's reporting. I sure hope that people rise up and take their cities and places back or move out, because not only are they going to vote, but they're going to put their money and their businesses and their places and their transportation and their manufacturing and their delivery and their protection, their police, where in small areas where they will be respected and trusted and supported. I pity these areas where these liberal mayors are, because it's going to look like a deserted ghost town, and their infrastructure is going to be torn up, and their business is going to move out in masses, and they're going to end up being in a ghetto. Think about this. It's Roger Martin from Village, Montana. Good day.